Good evening and welcome to Night Watch. Tonight you're going to have to, how can I say this, go back in history and try and remember some events at Gustafson Lake. For a while there, in the press every day for weeks, we heard about the events up at Gustafson Lake. We saw the natives with guns, the police, whatever. In the past few months, there's been a trial going on, and we've barely heard a peep. So on tonight's show, we're going to talk about that and what's going on in court. Joining me to do that, I have Bill Lightbound, who is a Kootenai elder, and welcome to the show, Bill.
Thank you.
And as well, we have Sheila Franklin, who is a Gustafson Lake defendant, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
And John Splitting the Sky Hill, and I'm used to calling him Doc, who is coordinator for the campaign to free Wolverine.
Yeah.
And welcome again to the show, because we've been on before. And Flo Sampson, who's Shuswap elder, and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I guess I wanted to start, because some people who've seen this show may have met Bill and Doc, and I wanted to start by talking to you, Flo. I guess I wanted you to tell me when you first came to the camp and why you decided to participate and what happened at Gustafson Lake.
I went to Gustafson Lake on August 22nd. I went there to support our people that were having been threatened by the RCMP or military, whoever that they were in bushes. I went up there to support them and to stand on the jurisdiction.
Did you, when you first went up there, did you have any idea that it would end up being the way it was? End up with gunfire, end up with a military-type situation?
No, I didn't think it would end up that way until some people from Alberta were going out, and they were the first ones to be, stopped and searched by the RCMP. And then after that, every car that was coming in or going out were being searched, and that's when it started, right after the 22nd.
It's hard for me to imagine being in that situation, and I want you to sort of talk a bit about what it was like for you to have gunfire and to have, just to be in that situation.
Well, at first, I didn't realize what was going on the outside as we were being barricaded in. I didn't realize there was that many RCMP and military out there. But while we were up there, we didn't have no fear. I didn't have no fear. We had our ceremonies. We prayed to the Creator to keep us safe, and our spirituality is the one that really kept us going. We became like a big family up there. Everyone had something to do. There was our ceremonies, our singers, our cooks, and people that made the wood, and people that got the water and stuff like that. We felt we all did something, keep ourselves busy, and we had our ups and downs, but we all talked together as a family.
And Sheila, how did you get involved in the situation? How did you end up at Gustafson Lake?
Well, I was in Vancouver in July, and I ran into a couple of friends that I hadn't seen for a long time. And they had just come from the Sundance. They were at the Sundance ceremony, not at the ceremony, but they were on the site while the ceremony was taking place. And they told me how powerful it was, and that unfortunately the faith keeper, Percy Rosette, that he had been threatened. His life had been threatened by the ranchers, that the rancher that claims to own the land. He believes that he has a title to the land, and Percy refused to leave the land, and he was being consistently and constantly harassed by these ranch hands. So I was concerned about my friend Percy, but also my friends Roz and Trond, who's also a defendant, showed me a videotape, and he showed me a videotape of a RCMP officer by the name of George Finley, who was assigned to investigate the land dispute between Percy Rosette and Lyle James. And on this videotape, Doc is actually speaking to George Finley, and George Finley says, I'll show you the report that I've written. And he brings out the report, and he reads it to Doc, and he's done a little bit of research about the land and the ownership of the land, and he's found that the land has been ripped off, that the land has been stolen and illegally shrunken down over time. And so here I was seeing this constable on a video saying that yes, the land has been ripped off, it's genocide. And that was consistent with my understanding of history and my understanding of what's gone on here in what's known as British Columbia. And so I was very encouraged to see this constable writing a report that the land had been ripped off. And so that was another thing that inspired me to go up there, because I thought to myself, well, now the police will have to do something. Now here we have somebody, part of the system, that's admitting that the land has been stolen. And that was, for me, it was something new and exciting. And so I went up there hopeful that something could be now resolved.
How did you expect what happened in the end to happen, and how did that feel?
No, I don't think, I mean, I had no idea that the RCMP would use that kind of force, that kind of intimidation and isolation. I had no idea that was going to happen. When I went up there, we were playing football, we were going swimming, playing hacky sack, joking around. Everything was fine. It was so calm and peaceful. And then it seemed to escalate so quickly. First there was a media blitz. The media came in full force, and then the police shut the road off, and they cut off our communications and trapped us in there. And we had the option to come out, but the thing was that Percy did not want to quit the land. Their intention was to get us to surrender unconditionally, to leave the land, and that was the entire point, was that Percy has a right to be on that land, as do all Shuswap people have a right to be on their land, their country, their homeland.
At the time of the confrontation, like you mentioned, there was lots of media attention, and what you were saying earlier, you talk about how people work together. You definitely didn't see that in the media. What you saw was guns, Indians with guns, terrorist criminals. But now we haven't heard a peep about the media. Why do you think that is, John? Maybe you can.
Well, I want to say that from the onset here that there's a very strong reason why we're not hearing anything out of the media right now. And I'll just make it very clear and very blunt, as I usually do. And that has to do with the fact that, as you'll remember, and Bill here will certainly be able to tell you all of the elements involved in the media up at Gustafson Lake during the standoff. But my real blunt statement is simply this, that on the one hand, while the RCMP, with their one-sided reporting after they closed down the camp, making the media, feeding the media all the information that they wanted the press to believe, and the press reporting as fact, never stating alleged shots or alleged anything, but reporting as fact that incidents occurred that the RCMP, with the one-sided reporting, reported to them in the press briefings. And Bill can certainly tell you what that was about. He was there. On the one hand, I believe, personally, that the press, for the very most part, helped manufacture consent for what was nothing less than operational plans designed to kill the people inside of Gustafson Lake, Waco style. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, now that the truth has come out in this course through circumstances that even, I believe, the prosecution didn't even themselves take the time to check their own lies, that the media, I believe, the editorial boards of the major networks has been briefed by the government of this province, and maybe right to Ottawa, that they should in fact keep themselves away from this trial so that this province doesn't become embarrassed due to what it's about to be shown to the people here today.
I guess that's what I was going to move to now. You can talk about what happened back at Gustafsen, but in terms of the press being called into a room and told they had to go through an RCMP officer. But I don't think we'll get into that now because we're going to move on to Bruce Clark. We have him on the line, and he was a lawyer in the media at the time. We heard saw all kinds of stories about his so-called court antics and questions of his sanity and stuff, and we'll go to that. And then we want to move on so we can show people what's coming out in court. And so we'll do that now. Welcome, Bruce, to the show.
Thank you.
Just earlier we were talking about the media and how at the time of the Gustafson Lake confrontations there was lots of media coverage, whereas now in trial there's no coverage, basically. And I brought up the fact that at the time as well, the media had all kinds of accounts of what they so-called your court antics and the question of your sanity. How do you feel about the media coverage that has happened with Gustafson Lake?
Well, I think that in future years, for academic purposes, the whole Gustafson Lake event, including the media coverage aspect, will be sort of an academic classic for how genocide, complicity in genocide functions in North America. And being a state crime, whenever and wherever genocide functions, one tends to find media complicity. And I think in future years it'll be seen in that light and just be a dismal chapter in Canadian history, and one that hopefully eventually will be well behind us all.
Now, the last time I spoke to you, I guess you could call it, you were exiled, and you were in Amsterdam, and you're now back in Canada. I want you to tell us about the Upper Canada Law Society decision. Decision
of the Law Society of Upper Canada was that, number one, genocide against the Aboriginal people is a fact in Canada, and that no rational person who has spent any time observing Indian reservations could possibly deny that fact. Secondly, the Law Society stated that it sympathized with me for the fact that the judges did not address the law when I attempted to present it to them. On those bases and on those two bases, and then examining exactly what it was I had actually said and done, the Law Society dismissed some 23 charges of alleged professional misconduct against me that had been laid by the judges and various persons in the legal system who preferred not to address the law. However, the Law Society went on and made a decision with which I profoundly disagree. It held that my attempt to arrest a police officer and my attempt to arrest certain judges of the British Columbia Court of Appeal for their complicity in the genocide was professional misconduct, not a serious form in the Law Society's view, that is, not sufficiently serious to justify anything more than a reprimand, which is really an inconsequential sentence. But the principle is important to me because having agreed that genocide is a fact and sympathized with me for the fact that the judges wouldn't address the law, seems entirely inconsistent that one cannot affect the citizen's arrest of the persons in the legal establishment who arguably are aiding and abetting the very crime that the Law Society has agreed exists. So for that reason, I'm appealing the Law Society decision as to that aspect, the reprimand aspect and the propriety of arresting these judges and police who are committing this crime of complicity in genocide.
Now, the public has a certain picture of what's happened at Gustafson Lake, but also it happened with the Mohawks, and it also happened, I'm not sure of the name of the place in Ontario, and what they are seeing is people picking up guns, threatening lives, shooting. What do you say to them? You were at Gustafson Lake. You have an idea of what happened there. What would you say to the public who doesn't want to tolerate that kind of action?
Well, obey the law. I mean, the answer to the public is obey the law. And if you disagree, if the public disagrees on the law, then the solution that the rule of law offers is the submission of both sides of the dispute to an independent and third-party tribunal, a court. And that's all that the Indians at Gustafson Lake were asking. You know, from the outset, their sole demand was that the point of law be submitted to the appropriate constitutional court for resolution.
And which constitutional court would that?
Go ahead.
Which constitutional court would that be?
Well, in 1704, much like the proclamation codified previously established common law, in 1704, the same basic principle was enunciated even before the Royal Proclamation of 1763, and what that principle was that where there is a legal dispute that has to go to litigation between Indian nations and non-native crown governments, that it is not appropriate that legal dispute be submitted to the courts either of the Indians or of their competitors, the crown governments. Both the Indians' courts and the domestic crown courts are presumptively biased in the interests of their own governments and citizens. That much being clear, the Queen, that is Queen Anne in council, created a special constitutional court to sit as an outsider to oversee these disputes between natives and newcomers. And that constitutional principle has never been repealed. It's in the nature of constitutional law principles that until they are repealed, they are presumptively valid. And for this reason, when Section 35(1) of the Constitution Act 1982 refers to, quote, existing Aboriginal rights, end quote, the quintessential right of all is this due process right of access to this special, independent, and impartial third-party tribunal. Now, it was that due process right of access that the native people at Gustafson Lake were insisting upon. And they did not threaten any non-native citizens with acts of terrorism. If the Indians wanted to kill white people or police, they wouldn't go and sit on the shore of a lake and draw a line in the sand and say, "Here we sit until you come and take us out." That's not what terrorists do. terrorists plant bombs in subways and have sniper fire and blow up school buses full of with children in them. That's what terrorists do. That hasn't happened in Canada, and it certainly hasn't happened at Gustafson Lake. But what has happened at Gustafson Lake is that some handful of native people got tired, desperately tired of the chicanery of the white legal establishment that was grinding them into the ground in this age-long genocidal process, and they decided to risk their own lives in an attempt, heroically, to apprehend that process of genocide. All directed at getting the issue of law heard and resolved in accordance with the rule of law. Now, all of that is eminently sensible, reasonable, and peaceful. All of that was turned into a terrorist circus by the hate propaganda of the Canadian government, the police, and sadly, the mainstream Canadian media.
Regrettably, we're going to have to let you go because we have only so much time to do this show, and there's definite couple of things we have to cover. So thank you very much, Bruce, for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, now let's see here. Okay. So continuing on that, and I don't know exactly how much time we have, is sort of talking about jurisdiction. I think most of us and most of the public were under the impression that the rancher, Lyle James, was the owner of the land. Does somebody want to take that on? Are we finding that's the case in court?
Okay, I'll respond to that, only because it's my turn.
Okay.
Anyway, no, I'm just being facetious here. The reality is that the question of the ownership of that land has been raised on a number of occasions through the court process, and up to this point, there has been absolutely no evidence forthcoming that could indicate that Lyle James, in fact, holds legal title to that land. And in his own testimony, he stated, for instance, that well, he just knows that that's his land, and because he was told that that's where his land was that he purchased, but nobody has any idea, in fact, where his land boundaries actually lay. And of course, in my own estimation, I believe that the land that he's referring to is not even close to where that camp was. Okay.
You know, on September 10th, I think I have the date right. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, with respect to the land dispute, I think what is at issue here is that Bruce may have referred to the Royal Proclamation. He definitely referred to 1704. Yes, and that is when there is a land dispute between Indians and the newcomers, or in this case, British Columbia or Lyle, the Crown, who has fraudulently sold the land to Lyle James, that what we're talking about, and I think it's a fairly common knowledge that 95% or the majority of British Columbia, what's known as British Columbia, is unceded, untreated Indian land. And in law, the settlement of the newcomers or the colonies on land without the consent of the people is illegal. It's fraudulent. They just opened up the books and started to give land away. They never had the consent of the people, and that's where the problem lies. And the people know that today. They say, we never gave you permission to be here. We never sold the land to you. We never lost the land in a war. So that is what's at issue, and that's where you have modern-day treaties trying to reverse that, or trying to legitimize the presence of the colonists or the presence of British Columbians on Indian land, on Shuswap land. And that is the way that they have historically done it, is through a treaty. And that's the way that we, immigrants to this country, to this Turtle Island, legitimize our presence on Indian land, is through treaties. And there are no treaties here. Yeah, it was too bad actually, because I was going to raise, we didn't have time, the proclamation of 1763, which recognized Aboriginal title. And it actually states, and this isn't the exact words, but I was looking at the proclamation, the Crown could not acquire land from First Nations peoples without their say and could only be acquired by treaty, which hasn't happened in British Columbia.
I might also add, by the way, just for other people's minds in regards to that process, that it has to be by full consent of the members of that nation. And the reason I'm referring to that is because they've got a fraudulent process going on right now in this province that they refer to as the treaty-making process, which in fact is not a treaty-making process. It's a land claims process, and it certainly isn't involving the majority of the members of each of the nations. It's a fraudulent process not only from the position of the Crown, but also from the position of some of the chiefs who, in fact, are sitting down and making decisions for their people without really involving them in a knowledgeable way as to the decisions that they're making and the signing of agreements to that effect.
I want to move on, if I can, to hit some of these points because I'm worried we're going to run out of time. My understanding is that on September 10th, there was a negotiated safe, I don't know if it happened on the 10th, but by the 10th, a negotiated safe zone or no fire zone. Can you talk a bit about that? Somebody? Flo?
No.
Well, I'll talk about the safe zone. First of all, there's two things here, and I'm going to raise them both at the same time because they're interlocking in a sense. They had what they referred to as the eye in the sky. Okay? And people should understand that that whole process, everything that happened in that camp and around that camp was under camera surveillance 24 hours a day from sometime about mid-August until the completion of that whole attack on those people in the camp. Now, that must be clear. The other thing that has to be clear in people's minds is that the RCMP agreed to what they refer to as a no-shoot zone. And they not only put that in writing and sent it into the camp in letter form, but they also accompanied the letter with a map clearly outlining the no-shoot zone. Now, it has to be clear to everyone that is listening that that was established and it was clearly understood by way of the letter, and we should have that letter here somewhere.
Yeah, we'll probably show that actually.
That as long as the people inside stayed within their boundaries, that they would not be shot at or attacked or any of those other kinds of things. And that the RCMP would stay outside of those boundaries that were established as well. And that was referred to as the no-shoot zone.
And I believe there was a road where people could go to get water and food or supplies.
That was within the no-shoot zone.
So here's a Mountie by the name of Duplanty. He says he was asked under direct testimony, so you were aware that there was a safe zone after September the 10th? And the answer is yes. Question, you also have a notation about Inspector Kimball advising that there was no ceasefire in effect and that any target of opportunity our members call. Do you recall that? I do. It refers to Kimball, who in what I think we need to identify and focus very clearly here for the sake of this show and this case is that there were a number of incidents, as Bill is saying here, that the eye in the sky shows that they were lying out of their teeth when they took the stand, you know, the various RCMP and ERD squad members that came to testify. And those major ones that we're highlighting today would be September the 10th, or September the 11th, and September the 12th. The truth about what happened with the truck, the truth about with the blowing up of the truck and the shooting at the occupants, and the shooting at a Native man walking alongside of alongside the lake on September the 12th. In here, Kimball gives it very clearly in the testimony, was one of the head of the RCMP at the camp during the time of the standoff. He makes it very clean very clear that they understood that there was a no-shoot zone, there was a ceasefire zone, and yet the people that were either blown up in their truck and shot at with hundreds and if not thousands of rounds, and shot the next day, the government clearly knew that the RCMP was in violation of that ceasefire. And this guy, Kimball, gave them the green light in the testimony, and the testimony's right here, was giving them the green light to shoot to kill, knowing that they were violating their own ceasefire agreements with the occupants inside the camp.
I wanted to talk about the red truck because we do have the video, like you said earlier. This is footage that actually, I guess the RCMP were taking themselves, and it's been presented in court. So what do we see when we're looking at this, this clip?
I'll address that really quickly.
Yeah.
What we hear, first of all, going back to the standoff last year, what we hear the RCMP telling the public that of the incident of the red truck. And what they told us in the beginning, the official press report was, Peter Montague stated very clearly that 2 occupants went out with a red truck outside of the perimeters of the ceasefire agreement, they were fully armed, that they were spotted as being fully armed with guns. They traveled down the road. They had to use a disabling device to stop the machine so that they could arrest them. But when the occupants were stopped by the disabling device, they jumped out the car, they grabbed AK-47s, and they started shooting at the police. Dosanjh, the Attorney General of this province, without investigating the incident, took that report and said that there were 3 occupants on a press release, and said there were 3 occupants that jumped out the car and started firing on the police. That was the justification for 20,000 rounds of bullets that were fired strictly by the RCMP that day. And what you see in the film, in this film, with their own eye in the sky, is you see the truth that, 1, the occupants did not have any guns in their hands, that while they were driving down the road just after they were going to pick up the elders, that while they were driving down the road, they were trying to get water for the elders. This disabling device, which is really plastic explosives, which is nothing less than a very powerful landmine of itself, runs over the landmine, hits the landmine, and you see the truck blowing up, the whole front of the truck hood blowing back. You then see the 2 occupants miraculously thrown out with no guns in their hands, thrown out by the impact of the explosion. They run and seek sanctuary by trying to swim across the lake.
Yeah, I think
and
you see
then
them in
you
the top
see
corner.
an APC come right forward and ram the truck. If they didn't kill them, if they didn't kill those unarmed occupants the first time, they were going to kill it with the APC. Then the next thing you see a dog jumping out of the back of the truck, and you see 2 sharpshooters right there alongside of the road, blasting the dog and killing the dog. That is where the first shots went out that day on September the 11th. That is what started the incident of September the 11th.
Okay.
Then you see 2 people going across the lake in the eye in the sky. They're swimming, and you see thousands or hundreds of rounds being hit on the water looking like missiles. You see 2 people surrendering when they come out of the lake, and you see the RCMP shooting at them before they tell them to put their hands up. One person gets shot. And it just follows a pattern of all the lies that were told to you, the public. You, the public, were told many lies. You were told a lie about an August the 27th event where 2 people were supposed to have been shot in the flak jackets. There is no testimony where they had an eye in the sky, the film to that August 27th event. They never introduced it into court because it never existed, so that they could gain your sympathy against the occupants of the camp. On September the 4th, they used the excuse They knew damn well that there was nobody inside of that camp shooting at the Suburban at night, stalking them, but they used it in their own night radar photo shows that nobody was there. They used that excuse. Their own forensic analysis shows it was hit by a tree branch, but they used that as an excuse to bring in the APCs.
I want you to talk about the APCs a bit, because to give an idea of what that is, because in the visuals, it's hard to tell, like, is it tank size? Are we talking military here?
They're 13 tons. They're 13 tons armored personnel carriers. They look like tanks to me. They had, at one point, 4 of them were very, very close to the camp and firing thousands of rounds. This is on September 11th. This is after they bombed a truck. And they told the public that the people in the red truck who were on their way to pick up elders and to pick up water, they told the public that the people in the truck were shooting at them. But in court, we've had testimony from about 6 or 7 different police officers, as well as military, that say nobody was shooting at them, that it was them who were shooting at the people. And so we have the testimony here.
And that they were actually getting themselves caught up in the crossfire. The 20,000 rounds, what the light moment about all of this, and I'm sure Flo can tell you, is that they were sort of laughing on the inside of the camp to a degree, because while they're shooting at each other in all directions with 20,000 rounds going completely crazy, with the gunfires that they started that day, everybody's sitting in the camp having coffee while they're shooting at each other. And you can almost, to some degree, you can see that right in there, that everybody's in the camp by the campfire having coffee while they're shooting at one another. But with that tank situation too, and I just want to make it clear, because I want to make it that the only testimony that has come out against Jones Ignace, is that they say that he fired a shot at the tanks right after they created the incident of September the 11th. And then that tanks, when they said that there was a shot that hit the tank, right, and that one of the Earth members inside of the tank yelled, "Shoot, eliminate the shooter." And they go and they started chasing a 64-year-old man with an APC that travels roughly 90 kilometers a minute through the bush. They were trying to run down Jones William Ignace. And the only incident that links him to anything that would be considered a charge, the only thing that they've said about him in court is that while they were trying to run him down, that he may have tried to disengage the tires by getting the tires, but that he was jumping in and out, and that they were trying to kill the old man. And the only thing that saved his life is when he went into the woods. He jumped into the woods, he hit a tree, and it disabled the steering device. That is what happened that day. They tried to kill him, and now he is the only person that has been in jail for 14 months for this, which is nothing less than self-defense of the highest degree. But we're not going to try to convince the people here, the public. The films themselves will show what happened.
There's another clip. And I believe it's a man. Well, what you see is, well, you can talk about what is it you see, what is going on. It looks like he's going somewhere with...
something to read there.
He's going to the lake, I believe, and he's being shot at. He suddenly... Do you want to talk about that clip?
No.
Somebody want to talk about that clip?
Oh, sure. After September 11th, there was many assurances of safety. They continuously told us that if we stayed around the camp, and they gave us a map, that we would be safe. And after September 11th, when they unloaded so many rounds at us, they told us that night that we would be safe, and that it was okay if we wanted to go down to the lake and wash up, that was fine, and that you know, as long as we stayed fairly close and didn't wander miles away, that we would be fine. So in this clip, you see somebody at about 8:30 in the morning walking down to the lake to wash up. He's going down to shave, and people from across the lake took shots at him. 3 or 4 shots hit the ground right between his legs and around where his feet are. And he hits the deck and he stays down. He stays there probably for 45 minutes. And we have radio logs and things. They think that they've hit him. They're calling for an ambulance. They think that they've killed him or injured him. And we've also had testimony saying that they believe that he was on his way to stalk the RCMP, and that the closest RCMP group that was in the bush somewhere camped out was 2 kilometers away. And so here he is walking towards what they know is a dock, and they've seen us go there to wash up, and he's clearly headed towards that dock. In court, they've testified saying he was in full camo gear, he was holding a gun like this in the port at arms position, and that he had face paint on, and he was stalking. This is what they've testified in court, but these poor officers didn't realize that we have the videotape from the sky, and it clearly shows that he's just sauntering down to the lake. He's wearing a bright pink shirt and black pants. He's not carrying a gun.
In the middle of a wide open field.
Yeah, in the wide open field.
And like Bill says, right, it's necessary for the people out here, all people out here, to hear the transcripts. So if I can, I want to read this section right here, okay? Okay. This is the same Kimball given authorization to make the kill, okay? How was he carrying it? It was slung over his shoulder as if he had a gun, which he only had a coat from the camera. What part of that could you see? From my observation of Westcam, I could see the silhouette of the rifle and the barrel in the shadows. Did you continue to watch this person? Yes, I did. What did you see happen? He continued to walk on the road, and then he veered off the road making his way towards the lakefront area. At some point, you indicated that he took his jacket off. Is that correct? Yes. Did you make any note of that? Or do you recall what he was wearing under his jacket? It appeared to be a reddish-toned T-shirt or a shirt of some sort. And at that time that the jacket was removed, could you see the rifle that you described? Yes, I could. And where was that rifle? It was still slung on his shoulder. After the jacket was removed, where was the rifle? After he removed his jacket, he returned the rifle to his shoulder location. What happened next? I had an expert marksman positioned across the lake, observing the movements of the camp. And it was my decision at that time, based on the events of the day before and the previous shootings of our members, I authorized the members across the lake to shoot at the individual walking down the lake. And when you look at the picture of the Westcam, you will see this man is not carrying a gun. Mm-hmm. But in fact, that RCMP officer, marksman, should be cited for attempted murder, just as the marksmen that gave the okay to blow up the truck should be cited for attempted murder, just like a number of people involved in this situation, which the police architectured and manufactured kills, should be cited for attempted murder. And as Bill said, and makes it very clear, as he's told us and the rest of it, that the people, you yourself, let the evidence show for itself, but you be the judge and see if it isn't time for the people, you people who have been lied to, all of us that have been lied to, it is a time for us to call for a citizen's inquiry. Instead of paying $50,000 for a trial to cover up for the truth of what happened at the lake and the jurisdictional arguments that they're trying to cover up, why don't we put our monies as peoples together and look for getting an inquiry as to what happened here, because certainly the charge of genocide is not stated lightly here in this incident.
Now, some people would say, some of the public who hasn't seen this footage, but just based on their information from the past, might say, well, you know, the camp had guns. It could be taken, it could be seen there was a proper threat, a threat against people. They had to act this way. What would you say?
I can't help but respond to that because, first of all, just about everybody in that region has a gun. Whether they're Aboriginal people or whether they're non-Aboriginal people or whether they're farmers or they're ranchers or whether they're woodcutters or whatever. People always have guns. They carry them with them. That's just the way it is in that particular area. As a matter of fact, most of British Columbia, rural British Columbia, is like that anyway, once you get away from the cities. Everybody has guns, and nobody ever thinks anything about it. Now, that's for starters. Yes, there were some guns in there. There were some hunting rifles, and yes, there had been some hunting going on. As a matter of fact, they did have some game in that camp, and that came from their hunting prior to the RCMP closing in on them, of course, and starting to give them a hard time. But I think it's time maybe that the public begins to understand and realize what is really going down here, because the whole thing was very well planned by whoever gives direction to the RCMP, and I don't know who that is yet, because it hasn't come out in testimony in the court yet who those individuals or that individual is that gave direction to the RCMP. But it was a planned project, and in fact that whole plan really started back in February, and it was put into play starting in July, and it came to a head in right near the end of August. And it went according to RCMP schedule, and at some point we'll be able to bring that proof forward. Once it has been put to the jury and they have seen and heard that testimony, then it will be made available to the public, and they will know then at that point what has really been going on.
And in that vein there too, I like to make it really clear that in constantly seeing what's happening in the court day by day, we have a great suspicion that what's going to happen in this case, because of all of these truths that are coming out, we have absolutely no pretensions that we know that the government themselves, from our observation, wants to throw this case out. They do not want to see this case come to a decision in a courtroom, as far as we believe, on the rule of law.
Especially by the jury.
Especially a decision by a jury who would hear the law. This court has done everything in its power to try to keep her, Sheila Franklin, who's acting as her own attorney, and Jones Ignace from putting the rule of law to the court. We want an answer to the rule of law. We want to put in the law so that there can be a ruling on it, at least in some form of the jurisdiction arguments that we stood on from the very beginning. This court does not want to address it, and we believe that there is some major intent, both from the government perspective and even internally. Right? There is something in some way that people want to see this out of the way before there is a decision that comes down. I guess the only message that I'm bringing from the Wolverine to this audience here is that he states very clearly that he wants to go to the very end of this trial. He does not want a mistrial to live out of this, to get out of this situation. He wants the truth to be exposed, that you can see the truth. Part of that you'll see here tonight, but he wants a decision. He wants a jury's decision. And I think in this case, we have a very alert and a jury that is very alert, and they seem to be listening and learning a lot. I can't really say a lot about the jury, except that it seems to me that they're watching and looking, and I think personally everybody that is going to watch this situation and the truth that's brought before you, in a sense, you actually are the jury too. And you have to decide about the questions of the rule of law. And I just wanted to make that clear because William Ignace wanted to make that message that he himself does not want to see a mistrial and wants to see the decision come from the court. No matter how long this government is using him politically as a scapegoat to keep him in jail, for political reasons only, not that he poses a threat to anybody, but for political purposes only. He's done 14, 15 months already, and he's suffered a great deal. His son, Jojo, is suffering a lot of psychological problems from being in jail. And many of the people that are on trial are having a hard time. And it's understandable to be uprooted from where everyone comes from. But the point is that somewhere this truth has to be brought to everyone out there and around about what the law really is. That's all we ever asked for from the very beginning, was a ruling on the standing on the rule of law.
I wanted to ask you, Flo, because I don't think it's been mentioned, or I don't know if it has, that Wolverine is your husband. And how has it been? I mean, the fact that he's been in jail all this time, what has it been like for you going through this?
It's very emotional for me. To see my son and my husband there every day, and to go home to an empty house without them.
Very hard.
It's hard to see my son suffering because of something that he never did.
And we're just coming to a close. And I have to say, in looking at the clips, that if I hadn't known it was Canada, I would probably think it was somewhere else. What do you think this court case is saying about our country? Anybody can begin that one.
Oh, boy. You know, as a matter of fact, this is a wake-up call to all of the citizens of Canada. I think that we live in what could be and should be the greatest country in the world, and a country that has been based upon respect for each other. Now, of course, that respect was never extended to Aboriginal people, but that's something that we've lived with and struggled against through the history of our involvement with Canada and the Canadian society. But the point is that other people should be very concerned about what is going on. If a government can make decisions to annihilate certain members of its population and to create an excuse to be able to do that, then I think it's time that every citizen in this country sat up and paid attention to what is going down here. They have to begin to ask themselves the question, why? Why is this happening? Why did that happen? How is it possible in this, the greatest country in the world, that the authorities in the country, over 400 armed policemen, as well as a bunch of people from armed forces surrounding a group of 18 people in a camp, and now we know who those people are. In fact, they're spiritual people. They were not warriors. They were spiritual people who were standing on what they knew was their rights. How can this country possibly accept that and live with that this horrible large force could be brought to bear upon that small group and open up and shoot in excess of 20,000 rounds in an hour and 3/4 at the signal of the blowing up of that truck? That was the signal to start shooting. Now, I might say one other thing here. Doc already mentioned the fact about the possibility of the court folding up. Well, in my estimation, the only reason that this trial would come to an end at this point, and if the judge ruled that there was insufficient evidence and the trial need go no further, what it's doing is denying the defense the opportunity to bring their case and to put it onto the record. In fact, only the prosecution has been in action for the 3.5 months that they've been operating this court. The defense has not started to put their case forward. And it would be a denial of the right of those people to have their say and to have it registered in the court process. And if the judge does rule in that fashion, the citizens of this country have to know that it's probably the greatest cover-up that has ever taken place in Canada, and they must then, at that point, insist upon a public inquiry, a full public inquiry, to bring all of the